My name is Emily Turner. I am 34 years old, and I found out about my house at my parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner. My grandmother set her fork down, smiled at me across the candles, and asked how I liked the house she had bought me, while I was still paying $1,180 a month for a one-bedroom apartment where the shower ran cold every third day. I remember my sister's wine glass freezing halfway to her lips. I remember my mother standing up too fast to refill water glasses that were already full. What my grandmother did next, nobody at that table saw coming. And what I found 3 days later, hidden inside my mother's china cabinet, was worse than anything anyone said out loud that night. Before this was over, I would sign a document my family never imagined I would sign, sit across from my mother at that same table, and learn exactly what my place in this family had cost, down to the last dollar. Let me back up about a week. I work nights in the pediatric intensive care unit at a children's hospital in Dayton, Ohio, 12 years on the floor, and I put myself through nursing school on double shifts and gas station coffee. I am good in a crisis. It is the quiet weeks that get expensive. That Tuesday, I came home at 8 in the morning and found a letter taped to my mailbox from the property company. My rent was going from $940 to $1,180, an extra $240 a month for a parking spot I had to fight for like it was sacred ground. I stuck the letter to my fridge, watered the plant on my windowsill, his name is Herb, and did the math standing up. I could cover it. I could always cover it. That is the curse of being the daughter who covers things everyone stops asking if you should have to. I am the one my family calls when my father's blood pressure medicine changes, when the insurance company argues, when a form needs reading or a hard call needs making. My only obligation that week that was not a hospital shift was my parents' anniversary dinner, which I was cooking because of course I was. To understand my family, you only need to watch us set a table. My mother, Diane, 63, directs everything. She ran the front office of an elementary school for 30 years and has never met a room she did not want to rearrange. My father, Frank, 65, a retired electrician, checks the weather any time the air in a room gets tense. A storm 2 states away has saved that man from more arguments than any lawyer ever could. My younger sister, Olivia, 31, works as an office manager at a dental practice, divorced 2.5 years now from a man who left the way he arrived, suddenly, and with someone else's suitcase. She has a 5-year-old son named Ethan, who is the best thing our family has produced in a generation. I love all of them. I want that said plainly before anything else. When I was 11, Olivia spent 4 nights in the hospital with asthma, and I stayed home making boxed macaroni for my father while my mother slept in a chair at her bedside. When they finally came home, my mother put her hand on my head like she was paying wages and said, "Family carries family." I stood a little taller. I was 11. I did not understand yet that in our house that sentence only ever pointed one direction. Some families pass down silverware or a lake cabin. Mine passed down a job description. There was the daughter who needed carrying and the daughter who did the carrying, and nobody ever asked me which one I wanted to be. There was precedent for all of this, and for years I told myself it was a one-time thing. When I was 17, I had a small college fund, savings bonds for my grandparents, birthday money, 3 summers of lifeguard wages. My mother held it for me for safekeeping. The winter I was filling out college applications, Olivia cracked 2 teeth on a trampoline, and the orthodontist bill looked like a mortgage payment. My mother sat me down and explained the family needed to borrow from my fund, just for now, because I was the one who could handle it. I told her, at 17, looking her right in the eye, that the money was mine. She said something I would hear again half my life later, that the account was in her name, custodial, for my protection. There was nothing a minor could do about that, and by the time I was not a minor anymore, the account had nothing left in it. Nobody ever called it stealing. It was borrowing, shifting, tiding over. Money in my family moved like a river, quietly downhill, always toward Olivia. I knew all of this. I was not naive about it. I simply believed there was a line somewhere they would not cross. There was no line. My grandmother, Margaret Hale, 84, my mother's mother, flew up from Sarasota for the anniversary dinner. She and my grandfather had farmed soybeans outside a small Ohio town for 50 years, and after he passed 3.5 years ago, she sold everything, the house, the barn, 60 acres, and moved south for the sunshine. She came off the jet bridge with a cane she used like a walking stick, lipstick on, a Goodwill coat despite the April weather. She hugged me hard at the curb and held on 1 second longer than usual, and I noticed it the way nurses notice things. Filed it away. At the house, she praised the roast, kissed everyone, and then sat quietly studying the dining room, corner to corner, the way you study a bill before signing it. I thought she was just tired from the flight. She was not tired. She was counting something, and it did not add up. Dinner started normally, my father telling the story of how he and my mother met, my mother correcting every detail, everyone laughing on cue. Somewhere between the roast and the salad, Olivia mentioned she was redoing her back patio, pavers, maybe a fire pit, and my mother beamed with pride. I made a joke about my own rent going up $240 a month, said my patio budget was a lawn chair on a parking spot. Everyone laughed except my grandmother. She stopped chewing and looked at me. Not a glance, a long look, then turned that same look toward my mother, and something in her face closed like a book. She set her fork down slowly, deliberately, the way you would lay a flag over a coffin. The table kept talking around her. Ethan wanted more rolls. My father mentioned sealant for the driveway, and through all of it my grandmother sat perfectly still, hands folded, waiting. When my mother stood up to clear the salad plates, my grandmother smiled at me the way you smile at a child who has just told an obvious lie, and asked me, right there at the table, "So how do you like the house I bought you?" I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke or a mix-up, and told her I still lived in my same tiny apartment. What house? Nobody laughed with me. The room went completely silent, fork scraped silent, furnace hummed silent, and every single eye turned not to my grandmother, but to my parents. Confusion looks up. Guilt looks at each other. My mother stood frozen with the water pitcher, pouring into a glass that was already overflowing, and said in a strange, bright voice that Grandma must be tired from the flight, getting her stories crossed. My father studied the garage door, as if the weather report might be hiding behind it. Olivia stared at her plate. Little Ethan asked, out of the mouths of babes, "What house?" And nobody answered him either. My grandmother let the silence sit, then laughed it off herself, waved her own question away like smoke, said something about getting old and mixing up stories, lifted her glass, wished my parents 40 more years, and asked for the potatoes. The whole table exhaled. Everyone bought the excuse except me, because I was watching her hands the entire time, and her hands were completely steady, no tremble, no confusion anywhere in them. When the dinner ended and coats came out, my mother announced my father would drive Grandma back to her hotel, and my grandmother simply said Emily will take me. Not a question. In the car we drove 10 minutes in silence before she turned to me in the hotel parking lot and told me plainly that she was not confused and she was not tired. 2 years earlier, she had sold the farm and wired my mother $185,000 to buy me a house. We sat in her hotel room until almost 1 in the morning while she laid it all out like she used to lay out farm invoices, no drama, every number face up. After my grandfather died, she sold the land for $410,000, banked half for herself, and decided she wanted to watch her money do good while she was still alive to see it. Olivia had gotten a big wedding years earlier, open bar and everything, and I had gotten a card. My grandmother had always known it, the same way she knew which field would flood first in a storm. So the plan had been simple: buy a house for me quietly, handed over on my 32nd birthday with a bow on the mailbox. She had just had knee surgery that spring and could not fly out to handle the closing herself, so when my mother offered to take care of everything, the search, the paperwork, the keys, my grandmother thanked God for a capable daughter and wired the money north, with the purpose written directly on the transfer memo. Then she waited for my phone call, which never came. What arrived instead, 2 weeks after the supposed closing, was a thank you bouquet of lilies and white roses with a florist card signed with my name. She had kept that card, she told me, pulling it from her purse, said it was the only thank you she had ever gotten from me, and it never sounded like me, that I would have called crying and made it awkward like a proper granddaughter would. I had never sent my grandmother flowers in my life. Someone had been writing my lines for 2 years. Here is how you keep a stolen house standing for that long. You build a fence around every conversation. My mother had told my grandmother a story, and the story was me, that I was overwhelmed, that I was private about money, that I had begged them to keep the house quiet because Olivia had just gone through her divorce, and I could not bear to make her feel small by comparison. My grandmother, raised on tact the way other people are raised on scripture, had honored that silence for 2 years, believing she was protecting me, when every polite silence was really a brick and my own mother had gotten my grandmother to lay them one by one. Once, early on, my grandmother had slipped and asked me on the phone if I was settled into my new apartment, and I had chirped that yes, it was small but it was mine, having no idea what she meant. My mother, apparently in the room when my grandmother repeated that story later, wondering why I would call a 3-bedroom house small, had laughed it off, said that was just how I was. I would call a castle cozy. When my grandmother's doubts grew louder, no photos, no housewarming invitation, no updated address for Christmas cards, my mother had an answer ready every time, that grandma had been on pain medication that whole year and was remembering things sideways. They had used her surgery against her. They had used my own voice against her. In that hotel room, my grandmother asked me the only question that mattered: what did I want to do? And I did not answer right away. She told me one more thing that finally broke through the calm I wear like scrubs, that when she wired the money, she had also written a card by hand at her kitchen table with the good pen my grandfather had given her the year they paid off the tractor, sealed it, wrote my name on the front, and mailed it to my mother with one instruction: give this to Emily with the keys. She remembered every word of it because she had drafted it twice to get it right, that it said, so she never has to ask anyone for a roof again, love Grandma. She told me my grandfather had hated debt more than hail, that the two of them used to lie awake in the hard years listening to the mortgage breathe down the hallway like a third person living in the house, and that a roof nobody could call in on her was the entire point of the gift. I asked if she had ever seen that card again, and she said no. She assumed it was tucked away somewhere safe, because that is what I do. I keep every card she has ever sent me rubber-banded in a shoebox with the sympathy notes from my grandfather's funeral. There was no card in that shoebox, because the card had never reached me, and until that night, I had not known to miss it. I stood up and got my coat, and when she asked where I was going at midnight, my own voice came out flat and level, my crisis voice, and I told her I needed to see the house tonight. The address was easy to find. I had been mailing birthday cards there for 2 years without knowing it. I parked across the street near midnight and sat there with the engine ticking. A small brick ranch, 3 bedrooms, a porch light glowing gold over a sunflower welcome mat. My sister's old wind chimes hung by the door, still in the cold air. On the driveway, in fading sidewalk chalk, someone small had drawn a rocket ship and a stick figure family of 2. I sat looking at my own stolen house filled with my sister's entire life, and the worst memory of that whole night surfaced, quiet as flood water. 2 years earlier, I had taken a Saturday off after a night shift and helped Olivia move in, carried her couch through that same red front door, hung Ethan's curtains covered in tiny planets, brought a housewarming gift because my sister never owned a good cast iron pan, and stood in that kitchen drinking store-brand lemonade while my mother told everyone how blessed we all were that the down payment had somehow worked out. I had asked once, offhand, where the money came from, since there was no mortgage paperwork sitting on the counter, and my father, checking the weather on his phone, told me some of Grandma's land money had helped with one of Grandpa's old parcels. You know how it is. It had sounded exactly true. It was even half true. I had carried boxes into my own stolen house and thanked my family for letting me help. My mother texted me the next morning, "Coffee tomorrow, just us girls, we should talk about Grandma. She has been confused lately." I went, because I wanted to hear her lie to my face before I decided what to do about it. I sat in my parents' kitchen with my hands around a mug I never drank from, because the nurse in me wanted vitals before a diagnosis. My mother worked through her opening like she had rehearsed it in the shower. Grandma was getting older, confused since the surgery, since Grandpa died, since the move. Grief does strange things. Maybe it was time to talk as a family about her affairs. Then she reached over, squeezed my wrist, and said the money situation had really always been meant for both of us in a way, that Olivia had nowhere to go after her divorce. There was a baby to think about. Things had just moved quickly. I let her finish, and then I asked her one direct question: whose name is on the deed? She refilled my coffee instead of answering, said houses and names were just paperwork. What mattered was that family had a roof over its head. There it was, my whole life summarized in one sentence. What was mine was paperwork. What was my sister's was a roof. While she said it, her eyes flicked once toward the china cabinet in the dining room, the tall oak one where 40 years of this family's important papers lived. I know that drawer. I have done their taxes at that dining table for 10 years, deeds and titles in the green folder, insurance in the red. When she stepped outside to take a call about a fence line dispute with the neighbors, I opened that drawer myself, and inside the green folder was a new manila envelope, unlabeled, containing everything. The settlement statement for the house, closed 25 months earlier, purchase price $185,000, paid in full, no lender. The deed recorded with my sister's name typed clean as a verdict. A printout of the incoming wire from my grandmother. Memo line reading for Emily's house. And at the bottom of the envelope, a small square shape I recognized before I even touched it. A greeting card envelope, ivory, soft at the corners. My name written across the front in my grandmother's upright, careful handwriting. Still sealed. 2 years sitting in a drawer 8 feet from where this family ate Thanksgiving dinner every year, and nobody had even bothered to open it. I photographed every page, put the folder back exactly as I had found it, and took the card because it had my name on it, and it was mine. I read it sitting in my car in that driveway, and it said exactly what my grandmother had told me it would say: "So you never have to ask anyone for a roof again, love, Grandma." My mother tapped on my car window on her way back inside, waved warmly, told me through the glass to remember family carries family this week, and went inside smiling. It was a work order delivered with a wave. I gave myself one day, then drove to my sister's house and knocked on the door I had once carried a couch through. Olivia answered in her scrubs, hair in the same crooked bun she has worn since middle school, and when she saw my face, she stepped back like the porch had tilted under her. We talked quietly in the kitchen so Ethan would not hear. To her small credit, she did not perform for me. She admitted she had known the money came from Grandma's farm sale, that our mother had told her Grandma wanted to help while she was still alive to see it, that when Olivia once asked if she should call and thank her, our mother had said no. Grandma hates a fuss. Don't make it weird, it's handled. So she never asked again. and chose every single day for 2 years not to wonder why an 82-year-old farm woman had never once come to see the house she supposedly bought. She asked me, voice cracking, if I would have asked more questions in her position if it were me with a baby and half a savings account and an ex-husband who took the car. Her son ran in holding a dinosaur sticker sheet, demanded I wear a specific sticker, then ran back out, and we stood there in silence while the argument died of its own shame. I told her the truth, that I did not know yet what I wanted to do. I went back to work because the ICU is the one place my job description is actually written down. 2 nights later, we stabilized a 9-year-old boy from a car accident, and at 4 in the morning his mother, a total stranger, gripped my hand at the elevator and thanked me like I had built the hospital myself, and I remember thinking that strangers thank me more than my own family ever has. On my break, I told my coworker Dana the whole story over vending machine coffee, and she listened all the way through and then told me I was doing to my own family exactly what I do at work, triaging them, assessing, managing everyone else's pain, and reminded me they were not my patients, that I was allowed to be the one who was bleeding for once. I went home and did the only thing I know how to do when the numbers are all wrong. I charted. I built a timeline on my laptop with dates and sources, the farm sale, the wire transfer and its memo line, the closing documents, the deed, the florist card, the phone call where my own words had been twisted into their story, my rent increase letter, my sister's patio plans. For pages, no adjectives, reading exactly like what it was. Not a misunderstanding, but a plan carried out by people who knew me well enough to know I would be too useful to ever suspect them. It turned out my grandmother had not spent her 2 weeks in Ohio just eating cake. Before she had even boarded her flight north, she had already found herself an estate attorney in Dayton named Patricia Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who wastes nothing, including sympathy. I drove my grandmother to that appointment expecting to wait outside, but she told me to come in, said it was my gift after all. Vance read through my timeline page by page like a surgeon studying scans, tapped the wire memo twice with her pen, and told me plainly that this kind of paper trail was unusually clean, that money given for a stated purpose and then diverted to another use is called conversion, that it was very winnable civilly, and, depending on how the county prosecutor felt about it, it could potentially be more than civil. The word criminal sat down at that table with us, and nobody asked it to leave. Vance laid out the path forward, a formal demand letter first, requesting the full $185,000 back within 30 days, then a civil lawsuit if they refused, with the option of a criminal referral still on the table. My grandmother folded her hands and said none of it would move without me. It had been my gift, so I would decide how hard we swung. I asked for a few days to think. That night, I found 6 missed voicemails from my mother waiting on my phone. When I finally called her back, it went in stages, like watching weather roll across a field. First, outrage, that I had taken my own grandmother to a lawyer over family matters, as if the lawyer were the crime instead of the reason for one. Then revision, that it had all been a misunderstanding, that the gift had always been meant flexibly for both of us, that they had done it this way to protect me from gift taxes, which did not survive contact with the fact that I am the one who had. Explained to her years earlier that the gift fell well under the lifetime exemption and owed no tax at all. Silence followed for a few seconds, and then came stage 3, the truth, delivered flat as a label, that yes, fine, they had used the money for Olivia, that she was drowning after her divorce with a baby and nothing left, and that I simply did not need it. Not an apology, not even really a defense, just a policy statement. I stood in my kitchen understanding for the first time, completely, that my inheritance from a living grandmother had been calculated and reassigned at my mother's dining table without me ever being consulted, and that this had never been a mistake anyone intended to fix. It was a system working exactly as it had been designed to. I made my decision about the letter that night. My father showed up at my apartment the next evening holding his cap in both hands like a man at a funeral home, and I made him decoff. He sat on the edge of my couch, whose twin lives in my sister's stolen living room, though I did not say that out loud, and asked me to make it stop. His exact words said my grandmother was old, and this lawyer business would poison whatever years she had left. That family could survive almost anything except a courtroom. Then he made his offer. So sad I had to look at Herb on the windowsill just to keep my expression steady, that if I told Grandma it had all been a misunderstanding and that I had known and been fine with it all along, she would settle down and rewrite whatever needed rewriting. Olivia would keep her roof, and he would personally pay me back every single cent himself. A retired electrician on a fixed pension promising me $185,000 in the exact same voice he used to. Promised the water heater had another winter left in it. I asked him the only thing I really needed to know, whether he had been at the closing, whether he had known the deed said Olivia's name, whether he had sat through 2 years of Sunday dinners watching my grandmother get quietly managed the whole time, and why. He looked at his shoes a long time before admitting your mother was sure it was right and you're strong. Emily, you've always been the strong one, Olivia isn't. There it was again, the entire family philosophy in one sentence. He hugged me on his way out, and I love my father, but that hug felt like a receipt. My sister came the following day, bringing Ethan with her, which I will never fully forgive her for because it worked exactly the way she knew it would. He barreled in with a crayon drawing of our house, a brick rectangle with a red door and a rocket ship, and off to the side a tall stick figure labeled Aunt Emily, holding a balloon which he stuck on my fridge himself before going to negotiate with Herb the plant. Olivia stood in my kitchen and half apologized the way our family always half apologizes, sorry used as a preamble instead of an ending, before getting to the real point, that our mother said if I would just sign a letter saying I had known about the house all along and was fine with it, all of this would go away, Grandma would calm down, nobody would be sued, we could all be a family again by Christmas. She admitted she had not even read the letter herself, that our mother already had it drafted and ready, short, because it only needed to do one job, move the lie out of their mouths and permanently into mine, signed and notarized. My mother had asked with a work order. My father had asked with a broken promise. Now my sister was asking with a 5-year-old and a crayon drawing. 3 people I loved in 1 week, all holding out the same pen. The night before I finally decided, I sat with my grandmother in her hotel room, and she told me where all of this had really started because she said I deserved to understand exactly what I was up against. It was not simple greed. She said it went back much further than that. When my mother was 16, my grandfather's tractor had rolled on a back slope of their farm and taken his left leg below the knee. It was 1979, there was no disability payment for a self-employed farmer and no neighbors who could spare more than a casserole, so my grandmother took the night shift at the local cannery and handed my 16-year-old mother the house keys and 2 younger brothers to raise. She would leave at 4 in the afternoon and come home at 2 in the morning to find the dishes done and the boys fed, and every single night, she told her daughter, "You're my strong one," like a prayer. She admitted now, decades later, that she had thought she was handing her daughter a medal, when really she had been handing her a bill. My mother paid that bill for 6 years and nobody ever paid her back, and my grandmother has spent the 40 years since making sure that bill eventually landed somewhere else. Because if the strong one does not have to carry everything alone, then what was her own girlhood even for? She told me plainly that she had invented the very thing now eating away at me, that she had taught my mother that love in this family flows toward whoever is drowning, and the one who can swim only ever gets a compliment for it. She said she was 84 years old and did not have time left to be tactful about it anymore, that she had not been rescuing me 2 years ago, she had been paying down her own old debt. And there is a real difference between the two. The letter itself arrived at my apartment the next day, hand-delivered, no stamp, my name written across it in my mother's handwriting, which told me she had driven 20 minutes rather than say any of it to my face. Inside was a single typed page prepared for my signature, stating that I, Emily Turner, had been fully informed of and had consented to the use of funds provided by Margaret Hale toward the purchase of the house, written so formally it might as well have been typed with gloves on, with a sticky note attached in my mother's cheerful handwriting telling me to sign it and come to Sunday dinner, so we could put this all behind us. Behind us, as though the past 2 years had been a pothole in the road, and not a road they had paved themselves. That night I sat at my kitchen table with 3 things laid out in a row: the letter on the left, sign it, and keep whatever was left of my family, every holiday intact, every Sunday dinner warm, and the lie permanently load-bearing with my own name propping it up, my phone in the middle open to photographs of the deed and the wire transfer, and my grandmother's card on the right, ivory and soft at the corners, promising a roof I would never have to ask for again. Around midnight, I noticed the strangest detail about that letter, the thing my mother would never fully understand, that it was the very first time in 34 years that anyone in my family had needed something that only I could give them. Monday morning, I took a personal day because there was a signature I needed to give, and it was not theirs. Patricia Vance's office smelled like paper and lemon oil, and it was the calmest room I had stood in for 2 weeks straight. The affidavit was already prepared, short, and every line of it was simply true, stating that I had never been informed of the gift, had never received it, and had never consented to its diversion to anyone else, with my full timeline and photographs of the settlement statement, deed, and wire memo attached. A notary in a cardigan watched me sign it and stamped it official, and it felt, if I am honest, like calling a time of death, quiet and procedural in the moment, and it only really broke over me later in the parking lot. Vance walked me through what came next, that the demand letter would go out by certified mail that week, requesting the full $185,000 within 30 days or facing a civil suit for conversion, with my sworn affidavit attached as supporting evidence. She told me plainly that they would know it was me the moment they opened it, not as a warning, simply as fact, and I nodded, because that had, in a strange way, become the entire point. I had spent my whole life being the name my family never put on anything important. They had put me on a florist card, on a fake script, on a 2-year lie, and now finally my name was on the truth, notarized, and no amount of Sunday dinners could ever unsign it. By Thursday night the letter had reached my mother's mailbox, and my phone started ringing in cycles, like contractions. Thursday night was pure fury. How could I do this after everything the family had done for me? Friday morning was tears, her voice wet and wounded, asking what kind of person sends lawyers after her own mother, a remarkable question given the direction the money had actually traveled. Friday night was ice. We got the letter. I hope it was worth it. Your father can't eat. I did not call back, not out of cruelty, but because I had finally noticed that every conversation with my mother was a room she had already arranged before I ever walked in, and I was simply done entering rooms on her terms. By the weekend, her version of events was already circulating through the family group chat, which I had apparently been quietly removed from. A cousin sent me a screenshot claiming I was suing my own mother over a misunderstanding about Grandma's money, that poor Margaret was being manipulated by a lawyer. An aunt I had personally driven to 2 medical appointments sent me a single cold line telling me she hoped I was proud of myself. That Sunday, for the first time in my adult life, dinner in my parents' house happened without me, and I only knew because my sister posted a photo of Ethan holding a biscuit with a fully set table visible behind him, one chair pulled out and empty like a missing tooth. I did not respond to any of it, no corrections, no counterstory, no screenshots fired back like ammunition, because the truth was already traveling by certified mail and did not need my help. The following Tuesday my father called, not to apologize but to summon me, using his careful voice, the one usually reserved for ice storms, telling me my mother wanted to settle this properly, everyone around the table like adults, and to bring my grandmother. I could hear my mother in the background giving instructions, and I understood immediately what this really was, an ambush disguised as a peace summit, meant to pressure me back into my old chair through sheer family gravity. I agreed to come anyway and spent the rest of the week preparing in my own way, working my shifts, sleeping badly, charting anyway, having one long call with Vance and one short call with my grandmother, who listened to my plan quietly and then told me my grandfather would have liked seeing me in a fight. I slipped her card into the inside pocket of my good coat, where I could feel its corner against my ribs the whole drive over. They had set the dining room like a holiday, the same tablecloth, the good dishes, a coffee cake nobody would touch, the exact same table from the anniversary dinner where all of this had started. My chair was in its usual spot, and I noticed, as intended, that everyone expected me to sit exactly where I always had. Ethan had been installed in front of loud cartoons in the den. My grandmother took the seat beside me, cane hooked over the table edge, hands folded. My mother waited until coffee was poured, hostess to the very end, then presented her solution with the bright, efficient tone of someone announcing a new carpool schedule, that Olivia and Ethan would stay in the house because a 5-year-old needs stability, that my parents would repay Grandma personally at $300 a month faithfully until the debt was cleared, that I would sign the letter, Grandma would call off her lawyer, and this family would put a hard season behind it, because family carries family, that's what we do. I sat there and did the math automatically, the way I calculate drip rates without deciding to. $185,000 at $300 a month comes to over 600 payments, more than 51 years, meaning my mother would be over 100 years old before the final check cleared, and my grandmother would have been gone for decades. It was not a repayment plan, it was a funeral schedule for a debt, and everyone at that table understood it except possibly my father, still staring hopefully at the window. My mother slid the letter across the tablecloth with her own pen resting on top and looked at me with total confidence. I did not touch the pen. I put my hands flat on the table and said, in the same low, even voice I use over a crashing monitor, that I had already signed something on Monday, a sworn affidavit prepared by Grandma's attorney, stating I was never told about the gift, never received it, and never consented to it, that it was already attached to the demand letter they had received Thursday, that the truth was already on record and did not need my permission anymore, and neither did she. The room fell into that same anniversary dinner silence again, except this time nobody was confused about where to look. My mother's face moved through several emotions in 5 seconds as she realized the summit had already been lost before the coffee was even poured, that I had walked in with the ending already in my pocket, and then she erupted, exactly the volume I had braced myself for my whole life, hands slamming flat on the table, china rattling, calling me ungrateful, cold, accusing me of tearing the family apart over a house when my sister had nothing and I had always been fine, and then came the sentence underneath every other sentence she had ever said to me, that I simply did not need it. I let it sit there on the tablecloth beside the untouched cake and the pen, and told her quietly that she was right. I never needed a house. I needed a mother who asked me before deciding what I needed, and when she opened her mouth again, I finished the thought myself, that I had been carrying this family since I was 11 years old, my father's paperwork, my sister's rent twice over, even my grandmother's tact apparently. That family carries family was true. She was just the only people I had ever met who refused to carry anything back. My father stood up and for a moment did not seem to know which direction to face, then turned to the window, present and absent at the same time, which was somehow the most honest thing he had done all month. It was my mother who finally cracked, and I need to describe this carefully, because for about 30 seconds I saw the 16-year-old girl underneath the 63-year-old woman, and I am not going to pretend that did not affect me. Her voice dropped out of its fury into something raw and young, and she said that nobody had ever bought her a house, that she was 16 when her father's tractor rolled, that she raised 2 little boys on a stove she could barely reach while her own mother worked nights at the cannery, that she had given up her own spot in nursing school. Did I even know that she had once been going to be the nurse? And that she had asked for help exactly once in her entire life, and this family had told her she was the strong one and handed her the next burden instead. So no, I did not get to be the first woman in this family to put herself first. That is simply not how any of this works. The room went completely still. It was the truest thing my mother had ever said to me, and it explained everything about her, and it excused absolutely nothing she had done to me. My grandmother finally spoke quietly to her own daughter, saying she was not the first, Diane. She was the first one I got to stand behind, that she could not afford to stand behind her own daughter back then, and that it was the worst debt she had ever carried, one she was finally paying now to me, because my mother would not let her pay it to her directly. My mother looked at her own mother for a long, terrible moment, then went cold and closed off completely, turned to me with a face like a locked door, and told me that if that affidavit ever reached a courtroom, I was no daughter of hers, the actual price finally spoken aloud. I told her, then I'll miss you. I've had practice. I've been missing you across this table my whole life. My sister made a small broken sound, and I turned to her because the next part belonged to both of us. I told the table my condition, and it was not negotiable, and it was not what any of them expected, that the money would be repaid to Grandma by the people who actually took it, not funded by tearing away my nephew's home. I told my sister she had 6 months to walk into a bank and put a mortgage on that house in her own name, that every dollar of it would go back to Grandma, that Vance would help her with the paperwork, and that she would finally be the first person in this family to actually pay for the roof over her own head, and that it might genuinely suit her. I told them plainly that I did not want the house, that I knew exactly what it felt like to discover the ground under you was never really yours, and I was not willing to hand that same feeling to a little boy who draws me on his refrigerator holding a balloon, that this was the entire difference between me and the rest of this family, and it was the only inheritance I actually needed. My grandmother reached over, placed her thin, worn wedding band against my knuckles, and told the room quietly that this had always been the entire point of the gift, so I never had to ask. My sister finally broke completely then, no longer performing an apology but genuinely crying, telling my grandmother first, then me, that a free house does not simply happen to people like her, that she had known that all along and simply chosen not to ask, that she was sorry, truly sorry, and had been too much of a coward to say it until now, the first fully honest sentence anyone in that family had spent on me in years. My mother said nothing else at all, and her silence was different this time, not the punishing kind she usually wielded, but the kind that happens when a script simply runs out of pages. I left before dessert. There was a symmetry to it I had not planned. A month earlier I had sat at that table while a lie collapsed over the anniversary cake, and now I stood up while the truth finally settled over it, and both times nobody quite knew the etiquette. I kissed my grandmother's cheek, stuck my head into the den to tell Ethan I owed him a pizza, the only debt in this whole story that actually got settled that same week. My father followed me out onto the porch, hands in his pockets, scanning a perfectly clear sky for something to talk about instead of what had just happened, told me she would come around eventually. She just needed time. You know your mother. I told him I did know her. That had always been the entire problem, that I had known her my whole life and had only just now actually met her, that I was not waiting anymore, and it came out gentler than I expected, which is how I knew it was finally true. It took about 5 months for every piece of paper to find its right name again, faster than Vance had predicted and much slower than my mother wanted. There was no courtroom in the end because a clean paper trail has a way of negotiating for you. Facing a conversion lawsuit they had no real chance of winning, my parents refinanced the house they had owned outright since I was in high school, which covered most of it, and my sister covered the rest exactly the way I had asked. walking into a credit union terrified with 2 years of dental office pay stubs and a folder I had helped her organize. Because apparently I can still be furious at my sister and alphabetize her tax documents at the same time, and she signed the very first mortgage of her life on the house she actually lives in, finally in her own name. The wire back to my grandmother cleared on a Tuesday that October, the full $185,000, and Vance closed the file with no criminal referral because the point had never really been handcuffs. The point had always been the ledger, and the ledger was finally true again. My mother has spoken to me exactly once since that Saturday, a Christmas card with a cardinal on the front, signed simply Mom, no note inside. I sent one back signed simply Emily. 2 stubborn women, one very short alphabet still between us. My father calls me every Sunday now and talks about football and never once mentions the weather in that dining room anymore. My sister and I get coffee once a month. No more scripts between us. Both of us slowly learning the strange new language of sisters who actually tell each other the truth. Ethan still has his rocket ship chalk drawing on the driveway, and he will never know how close it came to disappearing entirely, and that, honestly, is the whole victory right there. My grandmother gave me the gift again, properly this time, a clean transfer with my actual name on it, a gift letter drafted by Vance, witnessed, taxed at exactly nothing, precisely as the law always allowed. I will admit the embarrassing part, because the story does not work without it, that my very first instinct was still to refuse it out loud. 34 years of training announcing itself like a reflex, and my grandmother simply looked at me for a long moment and told me to try again. So I tried again and told her thank you, and it took absolutely everything I had to say those 2 words and mean them. In December, I closed on a house of my own, 9 showings, my own inspector, my own signature on every single line of it, a small brick placed 10 minutes from the hospital with a kitchen window that catches the morning sun. Herb the plant lives on that windowsill now, thriving and smug about it. And taped inside the cabinet door where I keep my coffee mugs, where I see it every single morning before a shift, is an ivory card, soft at the corners, 2 years late and somehow exactly on time, telling me so I never have to ask anyone for a roof again. Love, Grandma. I never framed it because frames are for things that are finished, and I read it instead like instructions, that if your family only loves you for what you can carry, put it down, because the people who truly love you will pick up the other end, and the ones who only ever stood there watching were never lifting anything at all.